Before I tell you what happened, I want you to understand one thing. I had the whole thing on camera, every single second, and then they still tried to lie. That's the part that gets me. Not the broken fence, not the $3,000 in damage, not even the police showing up at my door like I was the criminal. What gets me, what I still think about on quiet evening, is the sheer audacity of a grown man standing in front of a destroyed fence that he had just destroyed, looking me dead in the eye and telling me it was my fault. This is that story, and trust me, it gets worse before it gets better. Willow Creek Estates looked like the kind of neighborhood that belonged on a real estate brochure. Matching mailboxes, manicured lawns, little American flags in the flower beds every 4th of July. The kind of place where people smiled at each other, crossed driveways, and then went inside and posted complaints on the neighborhood Facebook groups. I'd lived at 14 Birchwood Lane for 6 years. 6 quiet, uneventful years of paying my HOA dues on time, maintaining my property, waving politely at neighbors I barely knew. In year two, I'd built a cedar privacy fence, 8 feet tall, pressure treated posts set in concrete, running along the left side of my property line. It separated my yard from the driveway of my neighbor, Diane Holloway. Diane was the kind of woman who wore designer activewear to check her mailbox. She had that particular brand of suburban confidence that comes from serving on the HOA board twice and never once being told no. Her front yard was immaculate. Her opinions were constant, and her son Tyler was 23 years old, unemployed, and drove a lifted black truck with a bass system so loud my windows rattled when he turned onto the street. I tried not to judge Tyler. I genuinely did. But there was something in the way he carried himself, the way he looked at people, like the rules were written for everyone else and he was just watching the show. I kept my distance. I minded my business. I figured as long as we stayed out of each other's way, Birchwood Lane would stay peaceful. That lasted until a Tuesday evening in late September. I was sitting on my back porch, iced tea in hand, listening to the crickets beginning their nightly performance, when I heard a sound that didn't belong in a quiet suburb. A crack like a gunshot, then splintering wood, then silence. And then Tyler's voice, low and sharp, coming from the other side of my fence. Oh no, 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 no. I set my glass down slowly. Something in my chest already knew. I walked along the inside of my fence, around to the front yard, and stopped dead. Tyler's lifted black truck was sitting at an angle on my side strip of grass, the front passenger corner buried deep into my cedar fence. Three panels were completely obliterated, exploded outward into my yard in a wreckage of broken planks and bent hardware. The post had snapped clean at the base. Splinters were scattered 6 feet across my lawn. What took me 2 full weekends to build was now a pile of expensive kindling. Tyler stood outside his truck, hands pressed to the top of his head, staring at the destruction. Our eyes met, and in that one moment, that single brief second, I saw it. Guilt, real guilt, the kind that crosses a person's face before they have time to construct a story. Then it disappeared. Tyler, I said, keeping my voice completely even. What happened here? He straightened up close slowly, crossed his arms, and when he spoke, his voice had a rehearsed quality that made my skin crawl. Your fence is too close to the driveway. I stared at him. Excuse me? It's built past the property line. My mom's been saying it for years. He gestured at the wreckage like he was a professor making a point. The fence was is an illegal position. That's what caused this accident. The word accident hit me wrong. Everything about this moment hit me wrong. Tyler, I said carefully, you just drove your truck into my fence. Because it was obstructing the driveway. His voice got louder now, performing for an invisible audience. Honestly, you're lucky I'm not the one filing a complaint. I took a long breath. I'd dealt with difficult people before. I knew what this was. He was panicking, and defaulting to offense because it's harder to shoot back when someone's already pointing at you. I'm calling my insurance company, I said calmly. I'd recommend you do the same. He already had his phone out. Yeah, he said. I'm calling someone too. I went inside, called my insurance agent, stood up at the front window while I was on hold, and watched the situation outside deteriorate in real time. Diane had appeared. She was standing in her driveway in a silk robe, pointing at my fence with the energy of someone delivering closing arguments at the Supreme Court. By the time I stepped back outside, she had positioned herself like a witness, voice carrying across both yards. That fence has been a hazard for years. We reported it to the HOA in 2021. It's documented. My son was simply navigating an obstructed driveway, and this, she waved at the destruction, is the predictable result of a neighbor who refuses to follow community guidelines. I looked at her standing there in her silk robe, perfectly composed, and I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, something colder and more useful than anger. Diane, I said, your son drove his truck into my property. She looked at me with practiced patience. The police can sort out the details. She'd already called them. Two officers arrived within 15 minutes. I watched from my porch as Tyler greeted them at the curb, animated, earnest, gesturing at the fence, the truck, the driveway. He was good. I'll give him that. He had the energy of someone who believed his own story. Diane stood slightly behind him, nodding with quiet authority. When Officer Reyes, tall and young with a notepad already open, walked toward me, I could tell he'd already been given a version of events. Ma'am, would you like to tell me what happened? My neighbor's son drove his truck into my fence, I said. Those three panels are destroyed. That post was pressure treated cedar, and I have the whole thing on camera. Officer Reyes paused mid-note. You have video footage? Four ring cameras on this property. One points directly at that fence section and the driveway beside it. Something shifted in his posture. He glanced back towards Tyler, who was still performing his version of events for the other officer with considerable enthusiasm. Could I see that footage? I pulled up my Ring app. The timestamp read 7:43 p.m. 22 seconds of video that made every single word Tyler had said evaporate into nothing. Tyler's truck backing out too fast, drifting at an angle, no obstruction, no unusual fence displacement. Just a young man driving carelessly, overcorrecting at the last second and plowing directly into the wood and concrete that had stood in the same legal position for 4 years. Officer Reyes watched it once, then watched it again. He excused himself quietly and walked back to his partner. I watched the two officers huddle, watched them turn the screen towards Tyler, watched his confidence posture crumble in slow motion, shoulders dropping, jaw tightening, eyes going somewhere far away. Diane moved forward, her voice still composed, carried perfectly. That camera could have been positioned or timed in any number of ma'am. Officer Ray's tone was kind but immovable. The footage is time-stamped and clearly shows the incident. The fence is not obstructing the driveway. Your son's vehicle made contact with the fence. That's what the report will reflect. I want a property survey conducted, she said tightly. That's absolutely your right, he replied. But tonight the fault is clear. Tyler stood by his truck and said nothing. He didn't look angry. He didn't look defiant. He looked like a little boy who had run out of road. The officers documented everything, photographed the damage, took my statement and my footage. Before Reyes left, he looked at me quietly. Keep that footage backed up in multiple places, he said. Already done, I told him. Cloud and hard drive both. The next 2 weeks were exhausting in the particular way that suburban disputes always are: bureaucratic, grinding, and deeply personal. Diane filed a formal HOA complaint claiming my fence violated property boundaries. The HOA sent a representative with measuring equipment. The fence sat 4 inches inside my property line. 4 inches. The representative looked almost embarrassed delivering those findings while Diane stood there in full makeup and a blazer like she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. Tyler's insurance accepted full liability. The repair estimated came to $3,400. They paid every cent without negotiation. But the part I think about most isn't the insurance payout, or the HOA ruling, or even the look on Tyler's face when he watched that footage destroy his story. It's the letter. 3 days after the settlement closed, I found it under my front door, handwritten on plain paper, no envelope, no knock. I'm sorry for what I said that night. I panicked and I was wrong. Tyler. 2 sentences, no excuses, no, but just accountability, delivered quietly to the one person who deserved it. I sat with that letter for a long time. I thought about how easy it is to reach for blame when you're scared and embarrassed. Tyler was 23, raised by a woman who had spent decades constructing reality to fit whatever was convenient for her. On that September evening, he tried to do what he'd probably watched her do his whole life. And it hadn't worked, because I had cameras, and patience, and the quiet discipline of someone who has learned that you don't need to be the loudest voice in the room. You just need to be the most prepared. I never shared that letter with anyone. It belonged between me and Tyler, and that was enough. Diane never apologized. She stopped making eye contact at the mailbox and began taking a longer route on her morning walks to avoid passing my house. Someone told me she'd quietly resigned from the HOA Architectural Review Committee. I never confirmed it. The fence contractor who repaired the damage stood back when he finished and admired his work. Whoever hid this, he said, did you a favor. New sections stronger than the original. That evening I sat back on my porch with my iced tea. The crickets were going. The neighborhood looked exactly as it always had, perfect from the outside, complicated underneath, full of people trying to manage their pride and their fear and their mistakes. I thought about what the whole experience had taught me. Document everything. Stay calm when others panic. Let your evidence do the talking. And never, not for 1 second, let someone rewrite the story just because they are louder than you. My fence stands at 14 Birchwood Lane, 8 feet of cedar, new hardware, concrete footings, built exactly where it belongs, and not one single inch closer to Diane Holloway's driveway than the law requires. If you ever had a neighbor try to flip the script on you, drop it in the comments. And if this story felt familiar, hit subscribe because these neighborhoods, they never run out of drama.